Hello and welcome to the Real World Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure you check out all of our other videos. Give this video a like. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell to get notifications of all the videos that we do here. All kinds of movie reviews, my collection. I do all kinds of collection videos. So if you're into movies in general or physical media, this is the right channel for you. So thank you for joining us. This episode we are diving back into our top five favorite movies of all time. We've done many of our entries already. We're now on our number two picks. So we're quickly approaching our number one pick. Today, we're going to be talking about my number two pick, which is Superman. And my guest, Bert, is joining us. How you doing, Bert?
Hey, fantastic. How's it going?
Doing well. His pick is Batman Begins. So it's a comic book bonanza here. Comic book movies, we're both big fans of the genre, and it's become very popular recently. So this should be an interesting discussion. We're going to have fun talking about these two today. All right, so we're jumping back into our top five films. We took a break to do our Tom Cruise podcast because Top Gun Maverick is now in theaters. It's a huge hit, so we wanted to talk about his filmography. But now we're jumping back into our personal favorite films of all time, our top five. We're now on our number two picks for each of our lists. We're going to start with my pick. This is a movie I adore. It is just a movie I can watch constantly. I've watched it so many times over the years. It's Superman, otherwise known as Superman the Movie, which was the promotional kind of material, had that title. But the official title is Superman. It was released December 15th, 1978. The runtime is 2 hours and 23 minutes, had a budget of $55 million, and it grossed $300 million. So it was a gigantic hit back in 1978. Directed by the great Richard Donner. The late Richard Donner just passed away recently, director of such films as The Omen. That was really his biggest hit before Superman. Went on to direct Goonies, which is another favorite of mine. One we watch every Christmas, Scrooged with Bill Murray.
That's a great
Lethal.
one. Yeah.
It is a great one, isn't it? Lethal Weapon, of course.
Those
The
are all
entire
good.
entire Lethal Weapon franchise he directed. Later in his career, he directed a really good movie that's kind of underrated, 16 Blocks with Bruce
Oh,
Willis.
that is a good movie. I
I
like
like
that.
that
That's
movie.
one of Bruce Willis's best ones,
I
actually. Yeah.
agree. I agree. Yeah. So excellent director. I mean, just all around, he's kind of, one of those guys who has done a lot of different genres, and he just always knocks it out of the park. And this is no exception. It's it's fitting that the first superhero, Superman, created back in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, two Jewish teens from Ohio, created this character. The first ever comic book superhero is also the first comic book character to get a movie. There was really no other Superman films before this. There were serials, kind of episodic adventures. There was, of course, the TV show with George Reeves back in the 50s, which was very popular. And of course, cartoons, the Fleischer cartoons, which I'm a big fan of back in the 40s. But never had there been a big screen, big budget feature film with a comic book character. It was a huge risk.
Wow.
No one thought it would work. The producers behind it, the Salkinds, were very eccentric guys from Eastern Europe, very wealthy family, and came to Hollywood and decided, you know what, we're going to take a big risk and turn this extremely popular character. I mean, he was known the world over at that point. By 78, the character had been around for 40 years, so everyone knew who he was, but Hollywood hadn't figured out how to make it work as a film. So they took a gamble, and it ended up paying off big time. So I don't want to talk too much about the character. The character is one of my favorite characters. Growing up reading comics, I probably have more Superman comics than any other character. He's just always one that I've gravitated towards. As I mentioned, created by two Jewish teenagers growing up through the Depression, Siegel and Schuster, who of course grew up with these biblical stories of Moses and Jesus. And you can see a lot of parallels between
Oh,
Kal-El of
yeah. Yeah.
Krypton, this character sent from the heavens to Earth by his
Yeah.
father to
The
kind
only
of
son.
save, right, exactly, to save humanity. It's
Right.
that whole thing. And so You know, it's a character that, you know, is really important to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Again, that whole Depression era, I think, you know, during difficult times in history, we need these kind of icons, these kind of heroic figures to look towards. And Superman's no different. I mean, you know, he's kind of this truthful, righteous hero who kind of just reminds us of where we come from, who we are. You know, specific, he's a very American character as well. I think he's important for Americans. And it kind of came that time again by the time we reached the 70s. We've gone through Watergate and Vietnam and all this stuff. So I think 78 was really the perfect time to kind of, again, be reminded, you know, Americans who they are, where they come from, what their history is. And so it has an interesting place in history just when this movie was released, I think, that
Sure.
plays a lot into it. It's interesting. I don't want to go through the entire film. I would love to do like basically just my commentary on the entire movie, but I do really enjoy how the movie opens. So the movie opens with this kind of very old school curtains, right? It's all black and white curtains. The curtains move. It's the old 1:3 aspect ratio, June 1938. A child is narrating. So it kind of sets the stage for the film, right? It's this whole idea of we're hearkening back to this old era, and it's all from a child's point of view. It's kind of reminding all the adults in the audience, remember when you were a kid and you liked all this kind of fantasy, fun, silly stuff? And that's kind of the journey they're taking you on, just setting the stage in that one opening scene that opens the comic book, the whole thing. And so that sets the stage. But it's interesting that the first line of dialogue spoken by the great Marlon Brando, perfect casting as Jor-El. I can't believe they got him to do that movie. I don't know how they convinced him. But his first line is, "This is no fantasy." And it's in the context, of course, of these criminals they're dealing with and everything. But I thought that was so fascinating that let's set the stage. Okay, it's harkening back to an older era. You know, it's a kind of silly comic book thing, but the first line is, "This is no fantasy." So they're trying to also ground it in a way that's it's not just going to be a silly comic book adventure necessarily. There are going to be these elements that ground it in a sense of reality that's very different from what people were used to with the character. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of how the movie begins. The motto of the film, so Richard Donner's motto above his office at the movie studio where he was working, was verisimilitude. So if you don't know that word, it basically just means to do something believing it's true. It's an attitude of truth. So even if you're doing something that's fantasy and not real, to do it with verisimilitude means you're doing it believing that it is true and it is real. And so that was the kind of the motto for the movie, because yes, you're dealing with a superpowered alien character, but they wanted to do it with a sense of, what if he was real? What if he was kind of in our world? How would people react to him? How would he react to others? You know, so it's that whole idea. Which I think is a big part of what makes the movie work. And Donner's directing of the cast in that way, that really sells the thing, right? The tagline of the film, "You'll believe a man can fly," is kind of the whole thesis of it, and the kind of goal they were going after. And, you know, bringing up the flying, I mean, that was the biggest challenge, of course, of this film, the effects wise. No one had ever done that. In the George Reeves TV series, he would just like jump out a window, and then you would kind of see him do like this, a real close up, you know. And it was like, okay, you know, that's the best they could do at that point. That's fine. But they had to use all kinds of tricks. I mean, wires, of course, were used. Entirely new front projection rig was set up that they invented themselves.
Oh,
Very early blue screen, some blue screen sequences. But really what sells it, apart from all the effects work and the extensive effects work that they had to put into it, is Reeves' performance. Christopher Reeve is the reason this movie works for me 100%. And it's so many other elements, but if I had to pick one, it would be his performance, because he really, even just talking about the flying sequences, it's the way he's moving, right? It's the way and it was difficult on him. I mean, he went through a physically demanding shoot in this movie on these wires.
Yeah.
The way he banked his body, the way he would use his arms, the way he would tilt his head and use his eyes and his expression, and he just made it look effortless, which is incredible. I mean, it doesn't look like he's trying that hard, even though it is extremely grueling.
Hmm.
It doesn't look like he's putting in any effort when he's doing those sequences.
Right.
And so, they didn't have the safety net of CGI like they have now. It was all in camera effects. And so, just an incredible achievement. And of course, this is coming the year after Star Wars. So they were actually already in pre-production on this film before Star Wars was released. So they hadn't seen Star Wars. They had heard about it. That it was this groundbreaking movie that was about to come out, but they were already prepping Superman before it was released. They just did an incredible job effects wise on it. It's a groundbreaking movie in that regard. Looking at other aspects of the production design, I think is phenomenal all the way throughout. Krypton, I like the very simple look for Krypton. It's got a very alien look, which is what I like about it. It does not look like anything on Earth. They're using all these crystals, and it's this kind of very monochrome, sterile environment, that they use. And I kind of like the way the Kryptonians are portrayed as well. They're portrayed very much as kind of emotionless, logical, reasonable society, very science driven. Jor-El himself is a scientist, and the villain that they're putting away at the beginning of the film is Zod, and he's extremely emotional. And kind of the speech he gives Jor-El before he's sent off to the Phantom Zone. I like that juxtaposition between kind of the council of elders and Jor-El, who's trying to let them know what's going on here, that the planet will be destroyed. They say he's crazy. He, of course, puts his son in the ship and sends him away. And that ship has a great design, that, again, kind of crystally, weird looking, just kind of floating object that I thought was really neat. The screenplay I really like too. Mario Puzo wrote it. He wrote The Godfather.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, great writer, who's very talented. The producers really went after him. Yeah, it's just well written. It's great. Got a great structure to it. I like how we move through his origin story. They take their time with it. We're on Krypton, not for very long, but I think for long enough to get a sense of what that society is like, and get that kind of, aesthetic of how it looks. And then we moved to Smallville. And Smallville has this great look, beautiful, warm wheat fields of Kansas, very Norman Rockwell, Americana, the farmhouse and the barn and the whole thing. And I think that sequence works really well. The casting of Glenn Ford as Jonathan Kent is perfect. He's a guy not many people know now, but back then everyone would have known who he was. He starred in many big films, 3:10 to Yuma, Cimarron, Jubal, all these big westerns that were really popular back then. So great casting. Phyllis Thaxter, who plays Martha Kent, is also great in her role. And Jeff East, I want to mention him. He doesn't get talked about a lot, but as the teenage Clark Kent, I think does a very good job in his limited role. He has to kind of play through a lot of emotions. He's there at the school with the kids, kind of getting picked on and bullied, and kind of showing off, with his superpowers there with the train, and making it to his house before the car gets there. And his father kind of lectures him about that, moment. I like that moment that they have together right before Jonathan Kent passes away. And then he has to play this kind of, very emotional scene and the funeral. And then he's off to, creates the Fortress of Solitude and that whole thing. So he does a good job in his limited role. That's a vital role, an important role, a kind of transitional period in his life that I think works really well. And then, of course, we're introduced to Christopher Reeve and the kind of big city, metropolis. They shot a lot of that in New York City. And it's this just kind of, again, a very different, there are 3 different locations, are each very unique. And, we get the Daily Planet, of course, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Perry White. Jackie Cooper, I think, does a great job as Perry White. He's really fun, kind of hot-headed newspaper editor. So yeah, it's a movie that, again, each kind of setting has its own look and feel. The acting, again, throughout is so well done. The writing and everything, I think, is really impressive. Again, I don't want to go through each scene of the movie. I wanted to highlight a scene that I think stands out. Of course, the first appearance of Superman is this big action scene with the helicopter, which I think is a really well done sequence. You've got me, who's got you? I love that line that Lois has, when he's kind of introduced to the world. I think that's all handled pretty well. I love and it has this great mix of humor in it, especially with the newspaper scenes where Clark's there, and Perry White's trying to figure out, who is this guy? We need to figure it out, and he's asking all these questions to all of them, and Clark's kind of standing there going, well, I know who this guy is. And there's a moment where Perry, I think, asks him, Kent, what's his favorite ball team? And it looks like he's about to answer him, and then he kind of stops himself, and then he keeps asking everybody else. There's little moments like that. The subtle kind of humor that's sprinkled throughout the movie, I think, works really well. But my favorite scene, I think, probably in the whole movie is after he's been introduced. He leaves this note for Lois, meet me tonight, basically. And so he shows up at her apartment. And so they have this great scene where she's interviewing him. No one knows who he is, and he's basically allowing. He's not. That's another unique thing about Superman, is he's not one of these superheroes who's like hiding. He has a secret identity, but the public knows who Superman is. He's very open with, here's who I am, here's where I'm from, here's my superpowers. I mean, he's a very hopeful character in that he believes in the good of humanity, maybe to a fault, and that's kind of one of his weaknesses as a character. But yeah, he's a very open kind of superhero. He kind of wants to inspire people, and his father kind of tells him this, the humanity's capacity for good, and they kind of lack the light to show them the way, and so that's kind of why he's there, and he kind of believes in this mission that he has. So the sequence is really cool, where she's interviewing him. He's being very honest. He's being very open. He's very poised, the way he carries himself. It's, again, the performance on Reeves' part is so good, because Clark Kent is just so bumbling, and he's slouched over all the time, and he's kind of just this silly guy, this persona he's putting on. And Superman is the complete opposite, very well spoken, very straightforward, and it's just a great juxtaposition between those two. But she's interviewing him. Again, he's being very honest and open, and charming, and she's kind of the cynical reporter, but she's still taken back by him. But she has this kind of relatable, kind of awkwardness about her, that I think works really well. Margot Kidder did an excellent job as Lois. And he says, I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. And she kind of laughs it off. It's kind of a funny saying now, especially even to our modern ears. It's even more funny. But that was the challenge of the film, is to make this kind of, he's known as the Big Blue Boy Scout in the comics. And so how to make this guy, who's this kind of just do-gooder, morally upright, omnipotent character, interesting. And again, I think they do it through juxtaposing the two Clark Kents, and bringing him up against, obviously, Lex Luthor, who we'll talk about in a moment, and dealing with how he believes in humanity's potential for good, but that's challenged often through the film. His choice at the end of the movie is, if he's going to listen to his father and not interfere in human history, or is he going to use his powers to save as many people as he can, and specifically those he cares about. And that's kind of his struggle throughout the movie, as he's trying to determine what kind of hero he's going to be. So I think all of that works well throughout the course of the movie, specifically towards the ending. And it's, this scene specifically, and then they, of course, go on their kind of, Peter Pan and Wendy flight, which maybe it goes on for too long. I've heard that criticism. Maybe it's a little too much, a little too silly, but I like it. this movie is unabashedly romantic, and it's the core of it is Superman and Lois, and so for me it works. I enjoy the scene. We'll talk a little about Lex. Gene Hackman. The only two actors they had on board before Richard Donner was hired was Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman. And Hackman, at this point in his career, is kind of at the height of his career. I mean, he had done The French Connection at this point, done some big movies. He was a very popular actor.
Yeah,
and they convinced him to play the role because of the strength of the screenplay. He wanted to work with Donner. And so, they were able to convince him to do it. And he adds this kind of, the comedic element for sure is there between him and Ned Beatty, of course, as Otis. It's interesting. He has his own Jimmy and Lois with Miss Tessmacher and Otis. It's a kind of interesting dark mirror of what Superman has going on at the Daily Planet. But
true.
He's diabolical. He's got this huge scheme, and he's extremely egotistical. I mean, that's, I think, one of the funniest parts about the character is that he's just so self-absorbed, and is just surrounded by complete morons the whole movie, and that kind of adds for a lot of fun moments that I really enjoy. And he's the perfect foil for Superman because, again, he's totally opposite. He's completely selfish, but he's also mind over muscle is what he tells Superman when he pulls the kryptonite out. And that, again, I like that interesting dichotomy there between the hero who can do anything physically and then the villain who's got the brain power to kind of outsmart him. And I think that's a great again juxtaposition between those two characters. So the cast, again, they make the movie work. I think they're excellent throughout. The relationships between all the characters are really well done. The action sequences are fun. There's no big villain for him to fight in this one. It was always conceived as a two-part film. So Superman 2 was actually shooting simultaneously.
Really?
So they shot them both at the same time. That way they could release, the plan was released one in Christmas of 78 and the next in the summer of 79. So they were going to release them very close together. And what ended up happening, of course, with a movie like this where all the effects are experimental, it went way over budget, way over schedule. And so about, I think Donner ended up shooting about 60 to 70% of Superman 2. And before they said, what, stop working on Superman 2, just finish the first one. Yeah. He finished that one. And then as he was about to start finishing 2, they fired him. He had a lot of issues with the producers. There was a lot of arguments back and forth about all kinds of different aspects of the movies. And so they ended up hiring a new director, Richard Lester, to come in and finish Superman 2. He added a lot of comedy into Superman 2 that for some people works. For me, I prefer the Donner cut, but we didn't get the Donner cut until 2006.
Oh, wow.
Superman 2, they finally let him come back, Warner Brothers, and he got to re-edit the movie. They put in new special effects for him. So they actually, spent money creating the Richard Donner cut, which is, I think, far superior to the theatrical version. But that's the one where he fights Zod and he has these villains to face off against. So you get a lot more action in that one. But I think they do a good job with the nuclear missiles, him chasing after those. Again, I like the whole montage of him in the city fighting these thieves and stopping bank robbers, and again, the helicopter rescue. I think even saving the cat out of the tree, I love that. I love that moment. That's so great. You would never see that in a superhero movie today. So that little stuff I just really enjoy. But at the end when he's, the bomb hits and he's, kind of saving this town from the dam that's breaking, and all this big action sequences that are going on, that's they're obviously use of miniatures and all kinds of different effects that they're employing and throughout the third act of the movie. And so it's a movie that I'm just thoroughly entertained by every time I watch it. I got to watch both versions, the original theatrical version and the extended cut, which I do slightly prefer the extended cut. It has some added scenes that I actually really enjoy. And so, I'm just always entertained by it. It's one I've seen countless times. I didn't necessarily grow up on it, it wasn't until I got into comic books that I found out about it. I was probably around maybe 13 or 14 when I first saw it, I want to say. Um, and but grew up with all the animated series of Superman, and I've seen every iteration that there is, all the way back. Again, I mentioned the Fleischer cartoons from the 40s are actually some of my favorites. They're really, really good cartoons. And then throughout the 90s, the DC animated universe did a bunch of Superman stuff with him and the Justice League. And but this is a movie that it's probably my favorite screen version of the character ever, animated or otherwise. And again, it just comes back to the story. They just tell the origin story perfectly. They stay true to the comic books, but add their own flair to it. And the direction, the screenplay. Of course, I can't forget to mention John Williams' amazing, iconic score. I put it as his best. I mean, for me, it's even above Star Wars. And it's just an iconic. I mean, you hear the word Superman when you hear that dun da dun da da. I mean, that's like he's singing Superman without actually saying anything. Sure. And it's got that romantic love theme with Clark and Lois, and just so many great motifs in the music here. So yeah, it's a 5 out of 5 stars for me. One I greatly enjoy. Obviously, my number 2 favorite film of all time. But what are your thoughts?
All right. Well, yeah, I've seen this film twice now. It's another one that goes way back, but I had not seen until about a year ago was when I saw it for the first time. And so I definitely needed to see it again to kind of get my thoughts together about this. As you've stated in depth, the movie is great. I feel it's great for its time.
Sure.
It's another one of these that, and I didn't realize it came out sort of concurrently with Star Wars.
Yeah.
Probably, and definitely would have been the best superhero movie of all time, right?
The only one.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not a lot to compare it to.
Sure.
That said, you're going to get the opinion of somebody that is coming in and just watching it from modern times.
Right.
Has seen now dozens and dozens of, superhero movies.
Sure.
I think you probably saw this for the first time in the 90s, did you?
I want to say, yeah, let's see. It would have been a little after 2000. I want to say, yeah, 2000, 2001, maybe 2002, somewhere around that range.
Okay. And in my opinion, I think the superhero movies sort of got good around 2000 with X-Men and so on. I didn't really care for, I like Batman at the time.
Sure.
Since then, I don't really care to watch that because there's so much better content. But so what I will say about Superman 1978 is all with in the context of preference, because obviously it was a great, outstanding film for its time.
Sure.
But again, so I'm coming in with this field of view of, all these other movies that so many of them are some of my favorite movies of all time, including my pick that I'll be doing today after this one.
Right.
So I'll start with what I enjoy about it. Again, watching for sort of the first time here in modern day.
Sure.
So obviously the music's iconic. It's great music. The theme is unmistakable, and like you said, you hit that pretty good. The film is very family oriented. I did watch the longer cut too. There's a couple moments of language, surprisingly, because they held back on that the entire film, and then and that's not a huge deal for me, but like if I've got kids in the room or something, maybe. And then there were definitely, in the longer version, there were a couple scenes that they really pushed the innuendo. Again, this is all very light compared to almost anything else you put on today, of course.
Right, exactly.
So it is still a very family friendly film.
Yeah.
I did like a lot of the vistas in the film. I don't know if they filmed it in maybe Montana or Canada, but some of the outdoor scenes I thought were really good.
Right.
So that was good. I enjoyed the plot of this movie. You didn't really mention, you didn't really have time to mention Man of Steel. I watched that first.
Oh, okay.
And I really enjoyed the plot. I didn't realize how much that borrowed from Superman,
Yeah.
It was kind of an interesting comparison to then go back and watch Superman and see, oh, Man of Steel didn't just make this stuff up.
Right.
It was directly
especially if you watch Superman 2, because Zod is the villain in Superman 2.
Oh, yeah, that does kind of make sense. Like you said, they sort of filmed it back to back, whereas they kind of crunch it all into one and Man of Steel.
Right.
So then the next part I'll talk about, I won't say this is the part that I found that was bad per se, but this is just all going to be preference. Okay. So I'll just kind of go through sort of the list of what I got here. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, the visuals. It's not fair to compare. I mean, obviously the visuals, it's not fair to say one was, they're better now compared to them. I mean, that's kind of silly because I mean, there's been so many advancements. I was going to make the point though about, Star Wars was out, you would think that some of them would be kind of on par with that, but Star Wars was, so good and it had yet to be released apparently.
Sure.
But I will point to like one thing, for instance, the miniatures, and they're, again, probably great for their time, but you look at the miniature set on Krypton, and some of the walls look kind of plasticky and almost Lego like. Sure. And again, probably great for its time, but compared to something like Star Wars, you could tell this, it wasn't the same team working on both.
Sure.
Again, it was a product of the time, so I mean, it's not like it was a bad thing. But just kind of looking at that, and then also you mentioned the Clark running next to the train. And I think they had to fit in there that he's faster than a speeding train, because later on in the film you have him faster than a speeding bullet.
Right.
It's implied there.
Sure.
and when he's running next to the train, I don't know what's going on because he's kind of small in the frame, but his arms are like going like this when he's running, and his legs are doing the same thing. And I'm going, that looks so bad. I actually rewound it, and I'm like, what is going on there? And he kind of looks like Gumby a little bit, but then it occurred to me it probably was stop motion. Honestly, it's probably the way that they
might have been
that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So again, these things really stick out from my perspective of all these, advanced special effects that are modern day. Again, doesn't mean it was bad. It's just what I enjoy or prefer. I look at that and I'm like, that's different.
Right.
And then the acting too, and I won't say the acting was bad. It was a little bit of a different time. I think audiences are so much more sophisticated now with how they want things presented.
Right.
And so it is a little bit of a different style.
Yeah.
You've got Marlon Brando in this scene where the planet Krypton is literally getting ready to explode. And he's very concerned for his son. He's got a way for his son to get off the planet. And there's a line here that he says that I actually had to write down because I couldn't remember the exact wording, but he says, if he remains here with us, meaning their son, he's talking to his wife. Right. If he remains here with us, he will die as surely as we will. And that was about the tone he used.
Right.
And I was thinking, what? Wouldn't you be a little more worked up about that? Like, we're all gonna die, get him off this planet, but it's just, I mean, again, it's not bad acting, but I'm going, it is Marlon Brando, and he's known for this kind of sort of really underplaying it.
Yes.
Probably worked back then, but what I gravitate toward is Russell Crowe, like he's up in the camera, like this is some serious stuff we're talking about here, and he gets really emotional. Yeah. So it's just a different style. I mean, I'm just saying it's what I prefer.
Sure.
So I use that word a lot.
Yeah.
Because I can't knock the original because obviously again, great for its time.
Sure.
So that was just one example of the acting that's just different than what I'm used to,
Right.
And we've talked before about realism. And I go more for the realistic tone, and that doesn't mean it's wrong to do it with a more I guess fantastical tone, or whatever word you want to use for that.
Right.
So and then other choices like Clark Kent, and I've seen other iterations, obviously newer ones in Man of Steel, etc. And he is use the word bumbling. He's so over the top though that it's hard to get behind going back and watching after all these years.
Okay.
It's just so it's hard to believe that he can go is so extreme from one to the other.
Yeah.
And I think that, someone like Tom Holland plays it a lot more believable.
Okay.
And naturally. But again, I mean, it depends how realistic you want it. I mean, you want it to be sort of this sort of funny kind of family oriented, silly kind of presentation. I prefer much more serious, again, my next film I'm going to talk about is all about realism and all that. And that's not everybody's cup of tea.
But
that's one example of where it didn't really work for me.
And I think an important thing to remember is because they haven't really leaned into this in the newer iteration and Man of Steel, um, or even in Superman Returns as much, but Clark is putting on a performance for his coworkers,
sure,
so that they don't suspect that he is Superman. So I think that's part of the reason why it is so over the top.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's why I think it maybe works for me, because he wants you to, he doesn't want anyone to suspect he could ever be Superman. Even though, I mean, again, Superman doesn't wear a mask. He's not trying to hide from people. But Clark has the glasses, he has the suit, and he's bumbling around, and you just bumping into that guy in the street, you would never think this guy that flies around and saves people, so that's again.
I get what you're saying. To contrast that, I mean, he'd be better off not being in the public eye at all, not doing interviews. I mean, if I was his agent, I'd be like, don't take that interview because you're going to get exposed.
Right. Yeah. I think the whole reason he's a reporter is so that he knows what's going on, so he can be in places like they explain that in Man of Steel. Like, I need to take a job where I know what's going on in the world, so I can know who to save and when, and that kind of thing. So
that's a good point.
But yeah, he would probably be better off being like a bus boy behind in someone's kitchen or something, where no one sees him.
Right. Okay. And the next point I had is the logistics. And again, this has to do with, I think, more again of the sophistication of modern films. Like, you've got scenes like the first action scene. I think you kind of mentioned it, where there's a helicopter at the top of the building.
Right.
Is it the building he works in? I think it is.
Yeah, Daily Planet.
Yeah. And Lois Lane is about to fly away, but instead they're about to topple off the top of the building. And the only reason he knows that that's even happening is because he walks out and happens to look up, because there's dozens of people looking up. And then he realizes that later on at the end of the movie, he knows from like LA to San Francisco exactly where to fly in a moment's notice, because he knows that Lois Lane is buried under some rubble.
Right.
So the two don't really jive. Whatever. I mean, it's overthinking it to some extent, but and the other thing too is, he when he sees Lois is about to fall off the building, I think anybody in his position probably would fly up to her, but he can't because he doesn't want to give away his identity. So he finds a place to change.
Right.
And then he goes, in the meantime, she could have fallen to her death. Plus, later, when he needs to change, he just does it midair while he's flying. So
that's true. Yeah.
Why? But I mean, these are just things. Again, I'm looking for everything to make a little more sense.
Sure.
And the argument can be made that, I mean, you look at a modern Marvel film, and there's huge leaps of faith you have to take with things that happen in those two.
Yeah. So, anything like this, there's going to be like that. And my only explanation for that would be there were people around while he was looking up at Lois. So he had to get away. Whereas when he's jumping out of the building, no one's really paying attention. So he can just kind of change there. Yeah. But I mean, there's little things like that. I mean, even when he does change, he goes to that revolving door and there's like 3 people outside and they're looking at him the whole time and commenting on his outfit and everything. So
it's all for fun. I mean,
it's just for fun. It's a comic book, I mean,
I'm not saying those things make it bad. Again, it's just a preference. So, and then I'll say one more thing before I kind of summarize. I'm a pretty big fan of Gene Hackman's work. I like him quite a bit. I don't really get what they were going for. Again, I watched the extended version, and there's just a lot of screen time of him. I mean, I'm sure in 1978 people were sort of laughing at some of these scenes that were set up, but I mean, it was so kind of like they're just dinking around doing all kinds of stuff that just has nothing to do with a plot or anything. Like he's swimming in the canal, which is like Grand Central Terminal, Aloha themed for some reason, like no reason at all. It just, and it's all, I guess, for comic relief, but I mean, I gotta be honest, like none of that stuff really worked for me. So it was kind of painful to watch because I mean, Gene Hackman's great, and if they need someone to in that kind of sort of like yelling, angry, like, why are you all being so stupid kind of role. I mean, he does that the best you can, but it just none of the real comedy in that worked for me. Gotcha. For some reason. So I mean, unfortunately, because like I said, I do love Gene Hackman. And so, here's what I'll say in summary. I like I said, it was great for its time. There was nothing to compare it to back then. I'm comparing it to dozens of films, modern day. I try to be kind to it. The film does have charm, it does have some charm,
a lot of charm.
There's good actors in it. If I had a room full of small children, I'm going to put this version on,
sure,
not Man of Steel, because I don't want to terrify them. So as a family film that's nostalgic, it's fine, but just not my thing. And so don't anyone be offended, but I can't really, I'm looking at probably 1 out of 5 stars on this.
Oh wow. Okay. So not much enjoyment.
Not because it's bad. Right. And that's just it. It's like,
just your personal enjoyment. Right.
Yeah. So sure. I kind of feel bad because for a lot of people this is a great film, they remember and that kind of thing, but it's just really hard to go back.
I hear
this time and get behind it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we've talked multiple times about you not growing up watching older films.
Correct.
And so, me growing up watching the original Star Wars films, all the old Indiana Jones movies, and it's just maybe easier for me to suspend disbelief a little. And that's just, it's going to person to person, that's going to vary. And so I appreciate the honesty. Yeah. I'm disappointed you're only giving it 1 star, but I appreciate the honesty.
And I have watched it twice now, so I feel that's probably where I'm at on it.
Sure.
Sure. So,
I hear you. That's fine. That's totally fine. Again, and talking just about Superman as a character, very difficult to bring to the screen because again, and when you're trying to imbue it, I think they imbued it with as much realism. Man of Steel kind of took it to another level, right? And the effects helped that, and just the modern sensibilities of where filmmaking is now helps Man of Steel a lot. And I know you're a huge fan of that film.
Every time I watch it, I like it more.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. This is what I can't really figure out in my brain. I took a peek at both your ratings of Superman and Man of Steel, and they're both either. Well, I know Superman's got to be 5-star, but I don't know if Man of Steel is or not.
It is
5 stars. Yeah. So you love the modern comic book films.
Sure. Absolutely.
My brain cannot figure this out. Why I get some nostalgia and some things you like about it and that kind of thing, but why above all of those other movies that I know you really enjoy from like Marvel and all those, why above all those even?
I think there's so many reasons. So I think the first reason is because it was the first one. And I give a lot of credit to the whole team behind the movie, putting in the effort and work to do something that no one had ever done. No one had ever attempted. Everyone thought it was crazy to even try. And they tried. And to me, they pulled it off. So all these movies, really every comic book movie, including the one we're about to talk about, is building on this one. And if this one had totally failed, like there's tons of bad comic book films. Say it had been one of those. Say it had been a, Catwoman, Halle Berry, or a Batman and Robin with George Clooney. The whole genre may have never even taken off. And it's really interesting. I'm excited to get into Batman Begins because one of the bonus features on this awesome collector set I have is a conversation between Christopher Nolan and Richard Donner.
Really?
Nolan is a huge fan of this movie. He actually went to Warner Brothers and said, I want to do for Batman what Richard Donner did for Superman.
And I think he did,
and he did. He absolutely did. So again, it's the sensibility. I like all eras of film. There's movies going back to the 1930s that I'm a huge fan of. Sure. So I guess that's why, because I see that it's a totally different style, and I can kind of put myself in that and in that time and say, does it work? And it works for me. I don't know. Again, you said that mentioned the charm. There's so much charm to it, and even the old effects. I think that's, and the production design. I just think there's such a kind of charmingness, and again, something Nolan talks about a lot is a tangible quality to it, right?
Yeah.
There's no CG, there's no digital. That's why Nolan hardly ever does digital, or it's always to supplement something he already shot, because he understands that practical effects is what makes it real and makes your mind connect and makes you kind of go along that journey. So I don't know if there's any one thing that makes me like this one more than the others. It's just, maybe it is a little nostalgia. Maybe it is that it was the first one. I thoroughly enjoy all the performances. The comedy works for me. I always crack up at Lex and Otis and their antics. So I don't know.
To compare it a little bit, I watched Return of the Jedi in the theater. It was the only Star Wars movie I saw as a child. It was the second movie I ever saw. I was like 10 or something like that.
Right.
And I thought, like I told you before, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
But the minute something better came along with better effects and probably more realism, I just really never even looked back at Return of the Jedi, and I don't hate Return of the Jedi, but I probably could literally name, I don't know, 50 movies in that genre that I like better.
Sure.
Because once the effects and stuff like that get better, it's not the bad ones, the good movies.
Right. Yes.
Once they get better, I don't really look back. But that is a big difference between you and I, and that's what I'm trying to sort of chip away at.
Sure.
You hold on to some of those older films, and you're not wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just wondering why it is that I watch these newer films. And I'm going, oh yeah, that's better. Because I'll say the last 20 years are like the best for well, I think film in general, but I mean, there's a lot of bad films in there too.
Sure.
But I think especially for the superhero genre, and then there's people that would say you're crazy, nothing beats 1989 Batman or Superman or whatever. And I'm going, yeah, man, that was good. But I mean, have you seen some of these movies they're making now? So that's what I mean. I'm trying to chip away at that a little bit as far as why. I mean, I try to be sort of even when I'm watching something, but I'm also kind of critical at the same time. So if a movie's bad in modern day, I don't have a problem taking a shot at it.
Right.
For some reason, I just feel like overall they're just so well made now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, and they are. I mean, as far as effects go, yeah, I mean, they're better. Again, I like the tangible quality of practical effects. So I think, stuff like Batman Begins and Iron Man does a great job. The first Iron Man, blending those, I think a lot of new ones go so far into it's just a full CGI world, everything CGI. And your brain there's a disconnect there. That I think just doesn't work. As great as CGI is now, and it's just getting better and better, there's still something about it that doesn't work to me quite as well as something that they just figured out how to actually do it, in the camera. So I
get that. And I do love the in camera stuff, the practical stuff. And that's why when I'm talking about the newer movies, I specifically criticize how successful they were with the CGI. We talked about with recent episodes that we've done. But anything else you wanted to add? Anything you don't like about Superman?
No, again, it's all the top 5. There's very few things I would point out. I mean, like I said, the whole "can you read my mind" scene, I get people criticize that as kind of being kind of silly and goes on for too long. It's fine with me. It doesn't bother me. I love spending time with these characters and in this world, the whole DC world. I'm a huge DC fan. DC is my favorite comic book universe, but
gotcha.
Not much to criticize on my end.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
All right, cool. All right, folks. Well, that was Superman. Now we're jumping on to Bert's number 2 favorite film of all time, Batman Begins. Take it away.
Okay. Batman Begins. Wow. Honestly, I just made a list of the things that I enjoy about this thing because it's hard to wrap my brain around it and even give a list. So I thought I'm just going to make a list. So here we go. And the biggest thing in this film is how it deals with loss of a parent and surrogate parenting. And I speak from experience because I lost a father when I was young. So as you can imagine, this hits home pretty hard for me. Sure. And so that carries quite a lot of weight. And it's revisited in other versions of Batman, but I think this one pulls it off, or he spends the most time with it at least.
Yeah.
And so right off the bat, there's that. And then the music that goes along with those scenes and throughout the movie by Hans Zimmer. I think this was Hans and James Newton Howard tandem.
It was. Yeah. They teamed up.
Yeah. And this is an interesting soundtrack, if you will, because it contains some of the best themes that I've ever heard on film, but mixed in there with that is a bunch of horror stuff, from the stuff. So it's not really a listenable CD. I have a playlist of just certain tracks, and even some of those I edited out. I took the time to edit out some of the like the horror stuff that comes into play. It sounds like horror when you're listening to it.
Yeah.
But some of the most amazing themes are in this film. I think if people watch the film 2 or 3 times, they'll pick up on. So there's that. Next, the fighting in this movie, I feel, is pretty good. It's realistic. Even though they talk about some martial arts, you don't see him doing ninja stuff. You don't see him doing stuff that's just, wire work where they take it out later with CGI. Right. I mean, no doubt they use some wires, but you don't feel like they're relying on that or bending gravity or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that. A lot of movies get that wrong, I think.
Yeah.
So so I like the the training scenes and the brawling scenes. I think they all work very well. They're pretty tightly edited, but they work well. And then you kind of hinted at this before, but the visuals are done. A lot of it is with practical means and then supplemented with CGI and miniatures. And I think they do a great job at that. Christopher Nolan does a great job with that too. Okay, so my next thought is to, I like realism in film most of the time. And he's basically the most realistic superhero. I mean, he's got no superpowers, right?
Right.
Except being rich. I mean, that could almost be one. So this is sort of the holy grail of he's got to be about the most realistic superhero movie there is, other than Mystery Men with Ben Stiller or something like that, because none of those guys had superpowers, right? And so I just really appreciate it for that. I feel like the movie could almost entirely happen in real life. There's a few inventions in it that are not actually invented, but you feel like we're talking about with the Six Sticks and Minority Report,
right?
Like some of the tech in this hasn't necessarily been invented because
some of it
isn't really necessary, but you feel like it could be. It's not It's not such a stretch. And so to me, it's very relatable, again, because of the emotional impact of Bruce Wayne losing his parents and how they play out those scenes. They spend quite an amount of time in that, and it's just the whole movie is pretty real. I really love Christopher Nolan's signature is kind of the nonlinear storytelling, and right off the bat in this film, we're viewing Bruce Wayne and not Batman, but just Bruce Wayne in two different arcs of his 2 different points in his life. We're following 2 different tracks. And
it's a great screenplay. The way it's structured is so good.
Right. Yeah. And I really love the way that works. I'll tell you, it was probably at least the 3rd or 4th viewing of Batman Begins before I really understood which scene was supposed to come when, as far as the flash. There's so many flashbacks.
Yeah, it's all non-linear. It's going all over the place, which most of Nolan's movies are.
Yes. And that could be frustrating for some people. For me, it just feels more rewarding. That's the way that's what I get from it. Is that every time I watch it, there's sort of another layer there.
Right.
And a lot of films don't have that going for them. The shooting locations in this thing are amazing. That sort of Asian prison and also the Wayne Manor were both filmed in England, I guess.
Yep.
And then you've got that Alps, that like sort of mountainside village and cathedral that was filmed in Iceland. So was that fight on the glacier where the water's still moving underneath the glacier, so you can hear the cracking of the ice all around. And it just really, I mean, that actually was really the real sound effects, I think.
Crazy.
From what I get from the behind the scenes stuff. Again, so much realism. I love the shots of Chicago, the Narrows, and the bridges obviously are just iconic Chicago bridges, downtown bridges.
Right.
So I always love that. I've attempted to visit a few movie shooting locations. I mentioned War of the Worlds was one,
right?
And this is another one because Chicago is kind of doubles for Gotham City in Dark Knight as well as Batman Begins.
Yeah.
And so I've gone back in Chicago and taken a few pictures of some of the locations where they shot some of these things. And it's very rewarding to do that too. So I love the fact that I think in Dark Knight Rises it switches to New York, from what I understand.
Yeah, I know they did some New York and some Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's
Rises.
A little bit of a different feel. Yeah. But I mean, Chicago's a beautiful city to photograph, or at least most of it. And then And then yeah, I mentioned the writing. I was going to say too, the smaller roles in this film by people like Morgan Freeman and Rutger Hauer and Cillian Murphy,
Killian,
however you
yeah.
say his, yeah. And Tom Wilkinson. I mean, they're not throwaway roles. I don't know why, but I just feel like they add so much. Probably because, most of that list there are just legendary actors to us here in America. And they just fit those kind of roles. You kind of see that person and you're like, oh, wow, they actually brought Morgan Freeman in on this for this part. And he just seems to add so much to it. And then I will get into criticisms a tiny bit, but first, let me hear your thoughts on Batman Begins.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo pretty much everything you said. I agree with, this movie released in 2005, kind of towards the beginning of the comic book resurgence that happened after X-Men. Nolan has stated that X-Men was a big inspiration for him as well as the original Superman film. So when he saw X-Men, he said, that's kind of how you can do these characters in a modern context and kind of ground it and make it gritty and real. And, so yeah, I mean, a couple more stats. It's a $150 million budget, ended up grossing 373 million, 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Of course, Nolan directed it. He's directed some incredible films, Inception being one of my favorites, Tenet,
that's great.
Dunkirk, Interstellar, The Prestige, Insomnia, Memento is a great one.
That's a great one too. Yeah.
So really talented guy, really knows how to tell a story visually, and likes messing with people's heads a lot. He really goes into the psychology of these characters on a level that hadn't really been seen in the genre up until this point. We really get into the psyche of Bruce Wayne here, I think probably more than definitely any other Batman film, probably any other superhero film in general. But and that's thanks to the great screenplay by David S. Goyer, who also wrote Man of Steel, and Christian Bale. Christian Bale is a phenomenal actor. Every single role he's taken on, I fully believe he is the character. He's just so believable. He's kind of one of these method guys. I was actually watching some of the behind the scenes, and in the interviews, he doesn't have his natural British accent because he's on set. So he still is in his American accent, which is just cool to see that kind of dedication from an actor. It's always just fascinating to me, the way he kind of just throws himself into it. They very much stay true to the essence of the character in the comics. At this point, there's over 80 years that the character's been around. He was created the year after Superman, 1939. By Bob Kane and Bill Finger. So he's the second superhero ever, second character to have his own comic book, Detective Comics. That's what DC is named after. And so, they do a great job of honoring the legacy of the character, yet bringing their own fresh take to it. Frank Miller's comic book called Batman Year One was one of his big inspirations. It's kind of focuses on the first year that Bruce Wayne is Batman, as he's taking on the kind of crime bosses and everything in the city. And that story also follows parallel James Gordon, who's a lieutenant in the Gotham City Police Department. Here he's played by the incredible Gary Oldman.
Yeah, I forgot to mention him too. Yeah.
Who I personally think he might be my favorite character in the film. He's one of my favorite actors in general.
Well, it's nice to see him play a good guy.
It is, yes. They were talking about that in the behind the scenes. Yeah, they were we were so glad he got to play a hero. He always is the villain. So yeah, he was very happy to play the role. And he's so good. He's probably the character more than any of them that grounds it to me, because he's just a family guy. He's just a good cop. You see him, with his family. You see him, his partner's taking all these bribes and all this, and he doesn't want anything to do with it. So he's such an important character in the film, and does such a good job. You mentioned the locations are phenomenal. The production design is great. Again, that kind of nonlinear narrative that the screenplay uses, and the themes. I mean, the themes are so clearly defined. They're obviously talking about identity here. Fear is the main theme of the movie. and justice, and what is the difference
Justice,
between
yeah.
vigilante justice and
Yeah.
true justice. So
Right.
the character Liam Neeson plays, spoiler alert, Ra's al Ghul,
Hmm.
is a great kind of dark mirror of Bruce, basically. And he
Sure.
comes into the
Yeah.
story where Bruce is kind of at his lowest point,
Hmm.
and he kind of is a potential father figure
Right.
for Bruce Wayne.
At first, yeah.
It's kind of, this is, you can go on this path with the League of Shadows and enact justice in this way, but he crosses the line. He
Yeah.
crosses that line Batman won't cross, of killing. And
Right.
so, acting as judge, jury, and executioner, which Bruce can't go along with. So
Hmm.
that shows Bruce's moral fortitude, even though he's dealing with this desire for revenge.
Hmm.
He still won't cross that line.
Yeah.
And that great flashback scene where he is going to do that, he's going to kill Joe Chill, who
Yeah.
murdered his parents after the courtroom scene, and he doesn't get the chance to. The chance is taken away from him by Carmine Falcone, played by the great Tom Wilkinson, who you can't even tell is an English actor. He just seems like
Amazing.
a guy in the mafia,
Yep.
incredible role. And so all those sequences are great. Again, each scene I feel like just builds on the character and the themes. And so, they do a great job with all that. I thought it was interesting. Ra's al Ghul kind of, playing God in this way kind of reminded me of Thanos. He talks, I think, actually has a line
Sure.
about restoring the balance,
Yeah, that's right.
and so I
Yeah.
thought of Thanos. I was like, that's interesting, that
Yep.
he's kind of doing this, and they've done this throughout history. The League of Shadows has been kind of
Yeah.
there in the shadows the whole time. So I thought that
Right.
the utilization of I think they're called the League of Assassins in the comics, but
Oh,
they do a good job with that, and the whole idea of Batman being a ninja, again, just serves to make him more real, and like you can believe this
yeah.
guy would do this because he has all these skills that he's learned over
Yeah.
these years. So since he left Gotham,
Hmm.
now he's picked up on how the criminal mind works, and how to use the martial arts and theatricality, and all these different things that he uses throughout the movie that just makes it, again, believable. So you can believe that this
Yeah.
guy would dress up like a bat. His reasoning for using a bat is great. He falls in that well in the opening
Hmm.
sequence, and is scared of bats, and he wants to instill fear in these people. So again, it
Yeah.
just was so well thought out, so well written, so well made. Again, you mentioned the effects are great. The villains are great. Of course, we have Ra's al Ghul, but also Scarecrow,
Hmm.
who's using
Yeah,
this
he's
fear
great too.
toxin. Yeah, he's does
Yeah,
such a
great
good
casting.
job. Killian Murphy just really knocks it out of the park. So, yeah, I mean, overall, it's just super well done. You again mentioned Michael Caine. The cast, I think, is a standout part of the film because, and that was one thing that Nolan was talking about in that interview he did with Donner, where again, casting Brando, Glenn Ford, Gene Hackman, all these big roles to
Yeah.
surround your lead with, who,
Sure.
Christopher Reeve was totally an unknown actor. No one knew who he
Oh,
was. He
gotcha.
hadn't been in anything big. He had done a couple stage plays, maybe a movie or a TV show. And Bale had done more. I mean, he's actually been acting since he was 13,
Sure. Yeah.
casted by the great Steven Spielberg in
Spielberg.
Empire of the
Yeah.
Sun. And
Right.
so he'd been acting much longer, but I don't think he was a big name actor. I wouldn't
I don't
consider him a
think
big
so.
name actor
Yeah.
before this.
I think people were
Um,
disappointed when they heard Christian Bale.
yeah, yeah, it seems to be a trend in comic book
It does.
casting.
Yeah.
They're like
Yeah.
always disappointed whenever they hear about it, and then it comes out and it's like, oh, he was great. He's the best one. So,
Right.
that seems to happen a lot. But yeah, just great dialogue. I wrote down some of the quotes that I enjoy. The Wayne legacy is more than bricks and mortar after the Wayne Manor
Mhm.
collapses, and he's kind of in despair. Alfred, why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves back up. It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. All these just great lines of
Right.
dialogue that again just kind of sum up these characters and what they're going through in the story.
Yeah.
I like the whole idea of the end of the film when they go to the Narrows.
Mhm.
It's kind of Bruce going back into Crime Alley where his parents were killed. It's kind of him confronting his fear again, literally in the form of
Yeah.
Scarecrow.
Yeah.
This kind of fear and this fear toxins now all over the city.
Mhm.
And so everyone's dealing with this, and I like that. I thought that was really well done. Going back to Bale for a minute, he's again playing three characters. I think I think Superman is three characters. You know, you have Clark on the farm, who's just kind of how he was raised. That's kind of who he is in his core. And then you have Clark in the newsroom, where he's the bumbling kind of fool. And then Kal-El, you know, Superman, this hero. And Batman's much the same way. Yeah. So Bruce is playing these three different roles. You know, Bruce, when he's intimate with characters like Alfred and Rachel, that's kind of who he really is. And then he's putting on the Playboy persona, buying hotels and womanizing and putting on that show for everyone else. And then Batman, this kind of symbol that he represents of, you know, justice and fear. So I think he does a great job in all three of those roles, which are all very distinct personalities that he has to pull off. And
that's true.
He just does a great job. So yeah, a movie I really enjoy. Do you want to get into your criticisms and I'll kind of go into mine too?
Sure. And then we can circle back and do ratings.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I don't necessarily have criticisms, but I'm going to talk a little bit about those that I've heard. And one of them is an actor that I did not mention before, but that is Katie Holmes. And I don't know why the internet decided that she's terrible. I've watched this movie twice in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
She's not going to win an Oscar for this role, but at no point do I feel like she drops the ball. In fact, I think she's good in the movie. At a certain point, she has to physically defend herself. Like, none of that seems like bad acting. I just don't know where that comes from. Do you have criticisms of it? Do you know where that comes from?
I don't know. Here's what I will say. I think her character is probably the most thinly written character. I think it's a failure more of the writing than of the actress. I think she's actually very believable as this kind of like tough as nails city girl attorney. Who's kind of got this mission, and she's I mean, she sets Bruce on the right path multiple times. I love when she slaps him in the face twice. I love that.
Exactly.
I think she works. I think she actually elevates the writing, you know, as much as it can be elevated. And she works for me. I think the romance is, again, I think it's the weakest part of the movie. I wouldn't say it's poorly done necessarily. I would just say it's what I would consider the weakest part of it. And it's not necessarily their relationship and the actors. I maybe their chemistry is a little off sometimes, but I would say it's one of, again, the weaker parts of the movie. It's no fault of hers or Christian Bale's, maybe more the writing. And the fact that they maybe don't spend quite enough time with it. I'm not sure,
but used a couple more minutes of screen time with the character. And that's a criticism I heard too, was that there's no women really in the film. And I mean, they could have balanced it out a little better, you know? Yeah,
they might could have. Do we even see Bruce's mother? I think we see her in the alley, of course.
That was
maybe two lines.
Right. Yeah, even the flashbacks to when he was young, it's mostly scenes with his dad.
Which that's just a choice. I mean, again, you only have so much time to tell this story, and they wanted to tell an entire origin, and it
was a lot to take on.
So it's a lot to take in, and I wouldn't call that necessarily a criticism.
I just like to bring it up because I don't want to pretend like other people haven't. I mean, we're in the internet age, obviously. Another one that this is really sort of the big one, and that's Batman's voice. You know, to compare it to Superman, I mean, Superman, again, not as much realism, but that's not what they were going for. But you know, he puts on the glasses, and for some reason, nobody can literally see through that.
He does subtly change his voice, if you notice, and especially in that scene with Lois, when after she's gone on the flight with Superman, she turns around, unlocks the door, it's Clark. And he is kind of doing a little bit of a higher pitch, and he's slouched over. And then there's that moment where it's like he's going to reveal himself, and he kind of, Lois, there's something I have to tell you. And then he kind of goes back into it. It's most obvious in that scene, and it's not as obvious in the other scenes. But if you go back and watch it again, you can actually pick up that he is changing it. But like you're saying on this Batman thing, the voice change is such a choice. I mean, it is like Bale is going all in on this voice.
it didn't bother me when I saw it. It made perfect sense and it was fine until again the internet decided that it was ridiculous.
Yeah,
and many parodies and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so now when I watch it, I sometimes I'm like, yeah, that is a bit much maybe with the voice, but
right. Well, it's the only way he could. Christian Bale talked about this, where when he put on the suit for the screen test, I mean, before he's cast or anything, when he put on the suit, he felt so ridiculous that he felt the only way I can make this believable and real is if I do this voice and make him try and make him
I didn't even know that.
Another creature. Basically, that was his whole idea of like making him this other being.
Right.
And yeah, it is. You're right. It is over the top. Certain points, it's a little much. But I appreciate what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I'd rather have him do that than not change his voice, And...
Right. And there's some inconsistencies with it, depending on who he's talking to.
That's true. Yeah.
But again, I don't mind that so much. I get the criticism on the voice. It took me out of it a couple times. Mm-hmm. I prefer it when it is more subtle. There's that scene where he's, I think they're at the train station and he's talking to Rachel for the first time as Batman, and he's just kind of crouched there, and he's just doing kind of a more subtle version. It's not the crazy, like. First of all,
how did
he do that? Yeah. I mean, that kind of had to have killed his voice.
Right.
But the certain scenes where it's a little more subtle is better, I think, and it works really well. And so, other Batmans have had their own takes on it. I mean, Michael Keaton didn't really do much. I don't think Kilmer or Clooney did much with their voices to change them. In BVS, he has the digital voice, which I think is great. It makes a lot of sense that it's like a digitized kind of.
Yeah.
And then in the most recent one that Robert Pattinson did, he did more of like a whisper, which I liked. And we can talk about that movie on another date, but they've all had their own kind of versions of it. And Bale's, it's a choice. It's definitely a choice. And he goes all in with it, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And so just a couple things in conclusion that I meant to mention. When you've got Gordon, Lieutenant Gordon approaches a young Bruce Wayne after he lost his parents. In the scene where he gives him his coat and says to him, it's okay. It's okay.
Right.
That's all he says. And you look at him, you can see in his eyes that he's like, it's not going to be okay, but I got to reassure this kid.
Right.
Scenes like that just kill me. They're just tremendously effective. And then you got the scenes with Michael Caine where he is just literally trying to be his dad and trying to leave a good impression on this young man who's about to go off and do who knows what.
Right.
I mean, those are just two examples of tremendous scenes that strongly impact me specifically because of my history, but I would hope other people too. But most people don't put this anywhere near the top of their list, even of Batman movies. So obviously it's a 5 out of 5 for me. Where do you rate this, or where does it command? Is it even in your top 100? Like, what are your thoughts on rankings?
Yeah, as far as movies of all time, I don't think it's in the top 100. I right now have it at a 4-star. So it's up there. It's looking at comic book movies, it's I think easily in the top 20. So it's up there. It's just such a well done origin story. I'll mention a couple more of my criticisms.
Go ahead.
I appreciate a lot of what they tried to do and making it unique, because there had been 4 Batman movies before this, 6 if you count the Adam West film. The Bat Tank, to me, such a cool design. They do some cool stuff with it.
A lot of practical stuff with it.
A lot of practical stuff. Yeah, they really built that thing, which is incredible. It doesn't work for Batman because, especially in this film, because he's a ninja and he's driving a tank. That just doesn't quite connect for me. Why?
I thought about it that way.
He's trying to be so stealthy in everything he does throughout the film. He's like sneaking into places, and then he drives around in this loud, gigantic tank that, again, it's cool looking. They did some great action with it. It just doesn't quite make sense in my mind why they decided to make it a tank. So, that's one thing that I don't particularly like about it. And when he's going under the vehicle, I'm guessing he does that to shoot the missiles.
Yeah, I don't know why he has to and can't press the button.
Yeah, I don't get that. I
I've
still
always
have never
wondered about that, but I always kind of like the fact that not everything is explained. So
yeah, it's fine. And they didn't build it for Batman. They built it for the military. They
right,
explained
that's
that.
true. That's true.
So
Yeah.
maybe there would have been another guy under there just to do that. I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. But
The worst
that's
job.
kind of a nitpick. It's actually inspired. I think he's inspired. The reason he did the tank is because Batman has a tank in the Dark Knight Returns comic book, also by Frank Miller.
Really?
He does, but that whole setting is a dystopian future.
Oh, really?
Where it's like gangs have taken over the world and Batman has to come out in this big tank and fight them. So he might have been inspired by that. I don't know.
It's probably a product of that they needed some good big action set pieces.
I'm sure. And and it works for that, really. So
it does for me.
The Scarecrow, really like the Scarecrow, like the mask a lot, that they paid homage to the comic in that way. I don't know why. Maybe I missed the scene. Why is he on a horse at the end?
Well, I would assume probably just because it
looks cool
and it'd be hard to drive a car through that kind of chaos, people running around screaming.
Hey, they don't explain it. It looks very cool. I mean, it looks awesome. Him on a horse. When he was on a horse, I went, where did he get that horse? I didn't know.
That's a good point.
I thought maybe the cops were on horses, but there were.
You feel like there could be a deleted scene somewhere that
there might be where he steals a horse from a cop or like kills the cop and takes the horse. I don't know.
Now that you mention it, that does, a better setup. There could have been better setup for that one. That's true.
Yeah. Again, it looks cool though, so I don't fault it too much. Also, is there only one kid that lives in the Narrows? They keep going back to this one kid the whole movie. I was like,
and I think that's just they're at 225 or something for this for the runtime, and I think Nolan
and they probably like the actor. The kid does a good job. So
I mean, you know who he is, right?
Right.
You know who he ends up again. You know who he ends up being though, the actor. He ends up being pretty much the most hated villain ever in Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay. See, I haven't seen that. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, when you see Game of Thrones, you'll be like, "Wow, that's definitely that kid."
He's funny.
He's really, really awful in that.
Right.
Terrific in that.
Yeah, good performance. Really, right. Him revealing his identity to Rachel. That's just kind of become a Batman thing at this point. Like he always reveals his identity to whatever woman is in the movie. So they just did that again, which is fine because they've known each other since childhood. He couldn't really hide it from her anyway. So that's fine.
That's a trend though with superhero movies. They go to a lot of trouble to keep their identity hidden and keep their family at arm's length. And at the same time, they bring them all back into it. And
that's true. It's just one of the things that the genre does that I'm fine with. it. Some of the editing, tell
somebody though, you'd be like your best buddy or someone you'd want to be like, no, really, I really am Batman. You gotta tell somebody, right?
You would have, you would
more
want
than just
to,
Alfred.
For sure. Right. Some of the editing I had some problems with.
Oh, really?
Again, it's a non-linear narrative, so it's super difficult to edit a movie like that. And they do a really good job overall. It's really just the end where he's fighting a bunch of bad guys, and it's super quick cut, choppy.
It is,
editing, which I don't prefer.
I don't prefer that either.
They did that when he's first revealed as Batman, with the shipping containers, and it works so well. It works really well because they're instilling the fear, and you don't really know, and it's kind of from Falcone's perspective, and he's kind of like just getting glimpses at him, and he's going all over the place and fighting all these guys, and it works. It's very effective there. But at the end of the movie,
view of the bad guys,
right, exactly, and
they don't know where
it's
he is,
freaky, Right. And so, but at the end of the movie, we've seen Batman already, and I kind of wanted to see him like really take on these guys, and it's just so choppy that you don't really get a good sense of geography and how he's taking them out. And
I mean, the Ra's al Ghul fight on the subway, but that
one's a little better. That one's a little better,
clearer. But I get what you mean. It's kind of that Bourne Identity, like choppy, like it could be anybody doing anything, we wouldn't necessarily know. Right. So yeah, that's true. It's not the best clear witness
action
to what exactly is happening. Yeah.
Right. And the suit, I'll say they did a good job with the suit overall. They perfect it in The Dark Knight. That suit is awesome. And he's so much more mobile in that suit. This is still a big rubber latex. It's actually the base of it, I think, is a wetsuit that they put latex like rubber on.
Okay.
But it's still a little He still can't move his neck, when they're in the Batmobile. He's like, Rachel, he's like very much looking out the side of his eye, still. So that's
well, I think they even comment on that, right? I don't know if it's in Batman Begins or Dark Knight. They talk about the progression of the cowl or whatever it is.
They do. Yeah. Which I appreciate.
And that's a great movie too, obviously.
Yeah. Dark Knight is, to me, a step above Batman Begins for me, but
most people say that. I think they're both great, but for whatever reason, Batman Begins, the first time I saw it, I did not think it was one of my favorite movies of all time, but I thought it did kind of blow my mind. I'm like, wow, that was extremely good, but there was so much going on in the non-linear fashion. By the second or third viewing, I fully appreciated it. So that's where I'm at. Number 2 movie of all time.
Definitely. Don't fault you for it at all. Again, I'm at 4 stars, so it's way up there for me as well. It's a solid movie. Really enjoy it. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on the Real World Podcast. Make sure you come back next week for an all new episode. Let us know what you think of these 2 movies in the comments below. Do you agree with our picks? Do you disagree? What do you like about these movies? What do you not like about them? Be sure to leave us a comment. Share the video on social media. All of our social media links are in the description below, so you can follow us there. Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell to get notifications of all of our videos here at The Real World. We'll be doing tons more videos for all you movie fans out there. So again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.